Hey guys, new unit on Australia and New Zealand. It's going to be super short. Today we'll cover Australia, tomorrow New Zealand. Thursday, you guys are going to do a Teach Yourself Day, and I'll explain that in a bit. For now, do now on Australia. Australia has over blank different reptile species, more than any other country in the world. Go ahead and take 10 seconds to estimate, take your best guess on how many different reptile species alone are in Australia. If you said 750, you are exactly correct and an amazing guesser. If you said anything within like 200 of 750, I would say that's a pretty good guess. Learning target for the day, I can describe the physical geography, history, and culture of Australia. Check for success. You're going to play quizzes to test your newfound knowledge on Australia. Today's date is May 26th. Today we're going to cover Australia. Tomorrow we'll quickly cover New Zealand. Thursday, you guys will be able to research whatever topic about Australia and New Zealand you found interesting on Teach Yourself Day. And then, of course, you're going to post on the discussion board on Friday. Today, you're going to take a short set of notes and you're going to use those notes on the Australia quizzes. The notes will not be graded. Go ahead and take a minute to set up your notes. Make sure you have a heading at the top. Indent your bullet points. Remember to write down just the underlined information, and each color is going to be its own bullet point. So the underlined information in red will be its own bullet point. The underlined information in blue will be its own bullet point. Physical geography of Australia. Australia is the only country in the world that is also a whole continent. It's the smallest, flattest, and lowest in elevation in the world. Yes, this continent is even smaller than Europe, which always surprised students. Does seem like Australia should be a lot bigger because it's a whole continent, but it's actually really, really small. If you need more time to write this down, go ahead and put your video on pause and push play when you're ready. Australia is entirely in the southern hemisphere between the Pacific and Indian Ocean. It's called the land down under because it's south of the equator. So if you were ever wondering why it was called that, why it got that nickname, it's simply because it's south of the equator. I wish they had a more interesting story of why they call it land down under, but that's it. Of course, it's not the only continent to be south of the equator or in the southern hemisphere. Antarctica is also completely in the southern hemisphere. Most Australians live on the coast where the climate is more tropical, temperate, more rainfall and vegetation, and looks like this. Ooh, ah. Very few people live in the interior parts of Australia, and that's because it's covered in desert. There's a lack of vegetation and rainfall, and we call that area the outback. It has that iconic red soil. This structure right here is known as Uluru. Go ahead and put the video on pause if you need more time to write down the underlined information. Push play when you are ready. The history of Australia. The official name of Australia is the Commonwealth of Australia, and this is because it was colonized by the British, similar to how Canada is Commonwealth of Great Britain. Captain James Cook claimed Australia for the British in 1770. When he wrote back to the King and Queen of England to tell them what this area was like, he said, "Oh my gosh, this place is terrible. It's dry. There's animals that can kill you all over the place. Nobody should live here." Of course, people were living there for thousands of years before he arrived. The Aborigines are the native or indigenous people of Australia, and they lived there for over 40,000 years before Cook arrived. One iconic part of their culture is that they play the didgeridoo, which sounds like this. All the sounds you hear besides the maraca are coming from this instrument, the didgeridoo. Don't worry, it gets more intense. He's just warming up right now. All right, pretty cool. You can also look up more of those videos on YouTube. All of them are pretty entertaining, pretty crazy instrument. Okay, so James Cook said this place is terrible, nobody should live here. Here is why more and more people came to Australia. In 1778, Captain Arthur Phillipps leads the first fleet to Australia, and the people on the first fleet were actually convicts from Britain. These were the people who colonized Australia. What was happening in Britain at the time? There was the Industrial Revolution, which caused an increase in the number of people living in small areas like cities, and this caused a lot of crime. The increase in crime, the way that the King and Queen of England decided they wanted to deal with this was just cracking down on crime even harder, like even tougher on crime. This didn't actually help. All it did was it made their jails way more crowded. They were running out of room and they were like, okay, where do we put all these people that we are jailing up? And they decided that they were going to put them in Australia. So they were going to take their worst convicts and put them in Australia, which was supposed to be this terrible, uninhabitable place in the first place. So the people who colonized Australia were actually convicts. Other interesting parts of Australia's history: Emu Wars, where they literally waged wars on a flightless bird; Burke and Wills, who were explorers who tried to travel all the way across Australia but failed, but they're still really honored in Australia; and the Stolen Generation, where Aborigine children were literally stolen away from their families by Europeans to make them more European; and the School of Air. Australia's culture. Australia's culture is closely tied to their history. For example, they speak English because they were colonized by the English. They celebrate their convict past on Australia Day, January 26th, every single year. And their culture, they strongly root for that underdog, because they were kind of built by a bunch of underdogs themselves. Surfing and water sports are a popular pastime because they are surrounded by ocean and most people live on the coast. Cricket is the most popular sport, and the School of Air that was just mentioned in the past slide delivers lessons via radio and internet, so the very first social distancing school that provides education for children in the outback who might not otherwise have access to education. So they did this distance learning because they had to, because there wasn't enough people living in the outback to build schools close by. So sometimes you would have to travel 2 to 4 hours to the nearest school. In order to deal with that, they decided that they were going to create schools that would deliver lessons through the radio, and now, of course, they do it through the internet. Political divisions of Australia. Australia has 6 states and 2 territories, and their capital is not Sydney, it's Canberra. Go ahead and take the information from your notes today and apply it to the quizzes. If you would like another shot at winning a random prize, everyone who gets 100% on the quizzes will be put into a random drawing for another random prize from Amazon. If you don't get 100% the first time you take the quizzes, that's absolutely okay. Quizzes will only report your best score to me. So whether it takes you 1 time or even 100 times to get 100%, you'll still be put into the drawing. So here's what you need to finish today: Australia overview quizzes, and then make a mental note of any topic that you would like to investigate on Teach Yourself Day. Remember, today we covered Australia. Tomorrow you're going to do a quick overview on New Zealand, and then Thursday you guys get to investigate whatever seems most interesting to you about Australia and New Zealand. So if anything sparked your interest today, just make a mental note. If you have any questions, be sure to message or email your teacher. If you'd rather, you can text 304-853-0426. Good luck.